Uh, Matthew, thank you so much for joining us on the Wonder podcast. Just to give you a bit of background, I am a retired entrepreneur, and I don't do that anymore because there's a lot of pain and the work is real. But I have three small kids, and for me, setting a good example for them and being a role model is probably the most important job I'm ever going to do. And so this podcast is really about highlighting the amazing teachers out there and shining a light on the quiet work that they do to impact so many people's lives in such a positive way.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's nice to meet you.
Thank you so much. And obviously, you came to my attention because of your unfortunate story, but one that so many people rallied around. Would you mind just giving people a little introduction into who you are, how you found yourself in uh, a teaching career, and then what happened?
So my name's Matthew. I live in Washington State, and yeah, I grew up here, and I grew up in a bilingual household. So my father's from Argentina, and I grew up speaking Spanish, and so that I had the language, and that's where that comes from. I was never a great student, and when I graduated high school, I didn't really know what to do, so I just started taking classes at the community college. And I just sort of fell into teaching. That's sort of the path I went into. When I graduated from college, I joined the military. I served in the Air Force for 4 years, and I got to travel around the country a little bit. And then when I got out, I had met my wife, started a family, and decided to go back to teaching. And I love working with students. I love helping people truly learn. That's my favorite thing about being a teacher is seeing students actually learn something. And seeing a student come back after a couple of years, and you just see how they fixed the error of their ways, they matured a little bit. Like that is really remarkable. And so to be able to like be a part of that process, I could really care less if a student memorized a few facts in my class, right? But did that student come alive as an individual? Do they think clearly? And that's my favorite thing about being a teacher. And so yeah, that's how I kind of got into it.
And having gone through that journey a few times with so many students, did you spot things that you can do that helps guarantee some form of growth?
You know, every student is, every like every person, right? We're all on our own life journey, and some kids are really born into a really tough situation. And so, maybe their parents are not in the picture and they just have a really difficult home life. And so, I wish I could make more of an impact in some of those students' lives where, they're just dealt a really difficult hand. Um, I'm limited in what I'm able to do, but I think I always just tried to be genuine and authentic in my engagements with students. And so asking really good questions to students that not so much me just telling them things, right? But setting a good example, being a positive role model in their lives. Are they seeing me at school functions outside? Do they see me and my family like together, and it's a good example for them because they might not get that kind of thing at home. But then like when you're engaging with in conversation with students, not stifling their creativity. So if they have a question or something that's thought provoking, really asking good questions to help them further along as they are thinking. Things like that. I think teachers really shouldn't shy away from things like that, because you have a responsibility to like help this student think correctly. And that's the most important thing about teaching, I think, is just helping students not what to think, but how to think.
So I think what you're saying is you see your role as more of a coach than
Hmm.
as a teacher in most of the ways people think a teacher should be. Here's what you should learn, go learn it. And what you're saying is, what do you think is the right thing to do here?
Yeah. And obviously students are going to respond, they don't have as much life experience, and so what they're able to respond with is limited, but the follow up, that's where a lot of the golden moments happen. And so but you have to draw them in through their own curiosities. I think that's the key. But then in unraveling it, and then they can discover where something goes wrong. And obviously, we all need the wisdom of people who are older than us. I'm not saying to just give students unrestrained guidance, like with or freedom without the guidance of the wisdom of older people. But there's a way to like draw it out from students, so that way they're discovering truth for themselves.
And obviously, you have a really hard job, right? As a parent, you've got one, two, three, four, five kids. As a teacher, you got many more. How do
Mm-hmm.
you set healthy boundaries?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, because I have, on any given day, I might be teaching between 140 to 150 students, and you know, there's things that are, you need to have professional boundaries. And there's been times where students ask me a question that I think looks too much into like my personal beliefs or like my personal life, where there really is no educational conduit like out of this conversation. So, you know, and we just have to maintain that healthy boundary. And really, I just kind of rely on instinct. I don't have a, a format or like something like a formula that I go through in my head. It's just sort of a gut feeling. Like, man, I probably shouldn't talk about this with you because that would go beyond like the teacher student relationship. Not to say we can't have thought provoking discussions, but sometimes a line could be crossed and you just have to be wise. And I think just common sense and relying on your instinct to not veer into those conversations.
And where did you develop that instinct? So to have that presence of mind in the moment to say, this is a boundary being crossed if I answer this question. Where did you develop that instinct that to have that presence of mind?
I think you just have to surround yourself with other wise people. If you practice common sense everywhere else in the world rather than just in certain areas, like that's going to follow you into the workplace as well. And so, I mean, I read a lot. I'm a Christian. I read the Bible, and it's hard to just point to like one teaching or one lesson I learned, but it's sort of just overall wisdom that you just acquire by spending time with people who you want to be like. And um, having a sense of cause and effect. Like, I've seen when I don't know, maybe cut this part out, I guess, but um, I don't know. It's just really hard to say. I think for me it's I've just had really good examples of people who practice this really well. And yeah.
Do you think that's a cultural thing of where you're from and the people that you're surrounded by?
Yeah, I think so. In the United States, like, people are very talkative, and people share their life stories with strangers all the time. Like, if you're at the grocery store and you're checking something out and you're buying food, and the clerk is, ringing up your item, they see what you're buying, they say, "Oh, what are you doing this weekend?" And you say, "Oh, we're having a barbecue with my family. They're flying in from out of town, and haven't seen my sister in 6 years, and she just got married, and now they're expecting a baby." Like, people they have so much alacrity to share their whole life story. And so, um and for better or for worse, and maybe that's just in a social setting, I guess, but I think in professional settings, especially one where you're focused on helping somebody learn, it's like, man, maybe that's good out in the, out in the world, but like in a classroom, it's like we're here for a certain objective. We're here to gain in knowledge and um, explore um, just the world of education and expand our knowledge. And so I think, yeah, I think you just respond like practicing responsibility. And, I've seen teachers who cross professional boundaries with students. Like you're seeing a lot of that right now. I don't know how many times I've opened up Twitter and I see videos of teachers who have gotten in trouble for crossing boundaries or um, like if you look at like some of the really woke things, like if you look at like libs of TikTok, I see videos constantly of like teachers who, they're prying into students' personal lives. And um, I don't know. I think that that's going too far.
So obviously there's a lot to unpack in that one response. We'll come back to the role models one. Um, this thing obviously about crossing boundaries. You've obviously been accused and lost your job because a group of people that oversee your school board have taken umbrage with something you did. Would you mind just explaining what you did and why you did it?
Yeah. So I teach high school Spanish. I'm going to be very clear about that. I teach Spanish at a public high school. And it was any normal day. It was a Thursday afternoon, sixth period. And I'm pacing around the room after, I gave my lesson. Students are working on an assignment, kind of quiet. And there's side conversations going on. And I overhear this conversation between these two girls talking about the book To Kill a Mockingbird, which is an approved book by the school. They're assigned to read it in our class, in the school.
Just
And
sorry to interrupt. Isn't it amazing that books need to be approved?
yeah, I mean, it's on the approved curriculum, and yeah, whether we could talk about that for probably an hour. Um,
Right.
but
But like seriously, in the land of free speech,
yes,
books need to be approved.
yeah, and I'm actually
Because I come from the UK. We don't have free speech enshrined in any part of our laws.
wow, yeah. I mean, it doesn't mean I certainly think that like I think there's age appropriate books, right? Like there's certain books that maybe are very vulgar or very graphic, and maybe 4-year-olds or 5-year-olds should not be reading that book. They're not mature enough, right? But like and that's going back to that wisdom thing, is like as adults, like who are making the decisions on curriculum, we need to measure whether a student is mature enough to be able to handle a book like this or not. And so we could get into that later. But yeah, To Kill a Mockingbird, it's been in American schools for decades. It's a classic. It's a very good book, and I overhear these girls talking about the book and how they're instructed to skip over the N word, right? And because it's a book about racial injustice a long, long time ago, and that word shows up about 50 times, and it's a sharp word. It 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 was used to dehumanize people, right? And today I rarely hear it out and about. You turn on some music, you might hear that word used in a different type of setting. But anyways, I think it's a disservice to tell students to skip words, because I see this as like when you control language, you control people's perception about reality, and you control how people think. Whether or not we agree on whether it's a bad word, sure, we can all agree on that. But like in a certain setting, in the context of a book, when you skip over words, you distance yourself from what the author intended you to feel. And it conveys a message, and when you skip it, you miss an opportunity to confront the ugliness of the word. You miss an opportunity to confront the history, to have a responsible discussion about it so you can actually understand it. Because if you don't understand something, you might just repeat the same mistakes. Well, anyways, I expressed my disagreement that they have to do that to these girls, and it just sparked a candid discussion about context. I wanted them to understand that context is important, and it's the intent of your words that really makes something evil or not. And a girl asked me, she's like, "Well, Mr. Mastronardi, if you were reading the book, what would you do? Would you read the word?" And I said, "Yes. If I was reading the book, I would read every word." And so it was a student asking me that question. And I thought there was value in this conversation. So
Like a teachable moment.
yeah, it was a teachable moment because, sorry, somebody just rang my doorbell. Um, these students are going to become citizens one day. And a rational citizenry needs to be able to have the mental faculties to judge between different contexts.
To build common sense.
To build common sense, if they don't have that skill, and every time they hear a word, they just emotionally collapse, that's a real problem. I think there's real value in this teachable moment. Well, I said what I said, and a boy whipped out the book. He had it in his backpack, and he went right to the page, and he puts it right in front of me, and he says, "Okay, do it." And I believe I was past the point of no return. This is not a situation I wanted to be in necessarily.
But you
But
didn't want them to think that you were hypocritical about the point you were trying to make.
exactly. And I have a lot of students who, I've formed a really positive relationship with them. And I think they look at me as somebody who has integrity. And I really think they would have lost respect for me after hearing that. And I don't think these are children, right? They're young kids, but they're not children. It's not like they're 7 and 8 years old. They're 15, 16, some of them are 17 years old. They're going to be citizens in a couple. I mean, they already are citizens, but they're going to be like
Voting
functional
age.
members of society
Right.
very soon. And I disagree with how much um, like protection they've had from truth. And so I felt like I was at the point of no return. And so I read a passage from the book that included Nigger, and I tried to make it a teaching moment. I said, you should never call anybody this in a pejorative way, but you have a duty and a right as a learner. You don't have to engage with books upon certain conditions, right? And, you're certainly not a racist if you read a book as written, because there's some people who think that. They
Yes.
think if you're white, you are not allowed to utter this word, even if it's in a book. And I just had to display for them that that's not true. It's not true. It's not the color of your skin, it's the content of your character. And as soon as you say that, oh, you can only engage with this literature upon certain conditions, or you're not allowed to engage with it honestly, I just think that's a really slippery slope. And they needed to hear that. I truly believe that. And so, you know, um, I don't think it's wrong to go off script when a student has a thought-provoking question that's educational. I'm not going to spend the whole class period talking about it, but to say 5 or 10 minutes for a real teachable moment, I think it's perfectly appropriate. And so I did that, and I was secretly recorded, and that video made its rounds around the school, and it made its way up to the school board, and I eventually lost my job over it. Just
And
last
and
week,
you were
this
very transparent with the process that the school board took you through, putting the letters on your Twitter account. Um, Now, obviously, it's clear that they had made a decision that they were going to fire you and make an example out of you, and there
Mhm,
wasn't really much fairness in the process. Um, but there were a bunch of people that signed a petition on
mhm,
your behalf. and I assume many of those are your students. Um, have you had a chance to speak to them about uh, whether they took anything away from this interaction?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the I told the students that I was not returning next year on like the 2 days of school left, and they were pissed. Like, I'll just say it, they were very upset. And a student is the one who actually started the petition, and it sort of this whole story took on a life of its own from that moment, because uh like they were fighting for something. And the lesson that I was trying to teach about context, I think they got a really practical, applicable example of that because it was unfolding before their very eyes. Prior to this, they're uncomfortable reading this word because they're told not to, and they're not given a chance to really think about it critically. But now they're seeing somebody suffer consequences right in front of their eyes, and they're thinking about it. They're like, man, is this a fireable offense? No, because he's reading from a book. He's not calling anybody this. And so they're actually working out this idea of context in real time in their minds. And so they're getting a great lesson. Whereas before, maybe they never gave it much thought. But now they're thinking about it. And so it's resonating. And yeah, the students, I'm so proud of them for sticking up for something that they believe in. And hundreds of signatures, and then it reached the community, and I think we topped out over 2,500, maybe almost 3,000 signatures. And they resonated with the lesson, because in my final days, they came to my classroom. They were talking to me about the situation and telling me exactly what I was trying to teach, pretty much. And then they would send a bunch of emails to the superintendent, and they would CC me on the email. I didn't tell them to do this, but they're doing it on their own accord. And they're writing beautifully written, persuasive emails where, man, I wish I could get them to write like that during the school year. But I
Sure.
think because it was something that was important to them, and it was a story, I think they resonate with stories. Like, it's a story that they saw themselves a part of. And so they were getting a great education, and nobody was forcing it upon them. Nobody's like shoving it down their throats. And I think that's how real education is. It
Sure.
comes natural.
Have you seen that teacher who does primary education, and she shows what she does in her creative writing class? I think she asked them to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and then one at a time, they give her the instructions, and so she put the peanut butter and jelly on the bread. And they don't say to open the bread, so she just puts the peanut butter on the plastic covering of the bread. No, 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 don't do that. Take the bread out. Okay, fine, I'll take the bread out. And then she's making the biggest mess you've ever seen, but it's hilariously teachable because they then have to learn to articulate clearly how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich.
That's brilliant. I love that.
And stuff like that and your story is inspiring. I don't know if you spend much time on social media, but once you have something that works, your audience just wants to see more and more and more of that. So a friend of mine, his name's Max. He's got 2 million followers on TikTok. The handle's Meals with Max, and he's really into his fitness. He got fired from his job, and he gave himself a few months to figure out TikTok. And he was doing fitness videos. Nothing was really getting much engagement. But when he was cooking for his followers, it was off the charts. So he just rebranded and stuck to that. And so now he cooks a few times a day for his followers, and they love him for it. I mean real love. And he's like, look, it's not difficult. You find the thing that your audience cares about, that they have a connection with you, and just keep doing that. So I think this teachable moment is, at least for now, your thing. Where are you being told to do something? that just doesn't make sense to you? Let's talk it through.
Yeah, that's really thought provoking. And I've been thinking about this
It's very
because,
John Grisham.
yes, because sort of overnight, like and like I've tried, establishing a presence online and, starting a podcast, but all of a sudden people really care what I have to say about this because
Yes.
I had a unique experience that maybe not a lot of people have gone through, and everybody has sort of sensed that there's this um, system in public education that really tries to silence truth telling, and it doesn't
So I
really.
understand that's one part of the story.
Yeah.
But I think we're all invested in you as somebody who stood up against something that didn't make sense because you saw these impressionable young people and thought, if you don't get this lesson now, you're probably never going to get it. Like you'll never be comfortable when someone says a bad word.
Hmm.
But I wish you had the experience, so I'm going to at least gently bring you into just understanding why this word is bad and what it was used for, to demean someone.
Hmm.
This is the whole point of this book that you're reading. If you don't read the word, you won't understand the point of the book.
Yeah, that resonates because something I've been thinking about is if students are only allowed to read every approved word, right? They'll do it, but then they have no understanding of how we actually got here, and that's a fertile soil for mistakes just to repeat themselves.
Sure.
And yeah, I stood up for something that didn't make sense, and I think it resonated with people because we don't see that very often. And I've felt this way, but like as I look around the world, we don't have too many examples in recent history of people displaying courage to stand up for something.
Sure.
And we're sort of deprived of courage. And I really don't think it's about a word. I don't think it's about a passage. I think I had to pick that fight to display courage for my students.
But you see this in adversity, right? You face adversity and people are now flocking to hear your story, to engage with you because they see the way you behaved. You saw the same with the now president and that shooting, right? Guy raising his fist above his head and saying fight. Like to have that wherewithal in that moment, you see people's character when they're most stressed and tested.
Yeah. And you can't really, at least if it's a genuine story, it's not something that can be fabricated, right?
I
Like
mean, people are good actors, but
they might be, but at least in my situation, I woke up that morning not knowing that this was going to happen, and it just sort
sure.
of landed in my lap. And maybe there's multiple ways you could have gone about it, but I think there's real consequences to controlling language, not reading books as written. I mean, you see this in the United States. When you control, or look at like when people try to read the Constitution and they don't do it like as written,
Right.
there's all sorts of consequences
I
downstream from
love the Second Amendment because it's always misquoted.
that. Hmm.
The Second Amendment, for those who don't know, is the right to bear arms against the government.
Hmm. Yeah, it's not so you can go hunt a deer.
Right.
It's a well-regulated militia being necessary
Right.
for the safety and freedom. Like, well, what do militias do? They defend people and they
Right.
fight. So, yeah, that's a great point. You
Um,
see it with like the Bible too, when people try to teach biblical texts, but they don't respect the word as written, and
right.
then it gives you an opportunity to read in your meaning, not what it actually means.
Hmm.
And there's consequences downstream from that because
Bad consequences.
bad consequences. People today don't know the difference between boy and a girl, or they're blurring the line. And one of the consequences of that is that you have boys competing in women's sports and nobody doing anything about it because the meaning for what these words mean, we've lost the real meaning.
Well, I mean, pre the Trump win, they were paralyzed by one not wanting to be cancelled, right?
Mm-hmm.
There was a real liability that they didn't want to have in their ledger.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, post the Trump win, that's largely unraveling in the US, and that's permeating across to Europe as well.
Yeah. Are you based in the United States or are you based in the UK?
So, I have a lot of family in California. Half my family's in California. I was in Miami all of last year. I wanted to make a permanent move, but I don't work, and the US is not a cheap place to live. Cost of living is real. And so I decided for the time being, I was going to be here near my kids and concentrate on creating more content and educating my kids, and then see where life takes me. I really am drawn to people in the US. When I went to Miami last year, a lot of my friends would screw up their face and say, "Why do you want to go to the US? It's a crazy place." I'm like, "Yes, also a crazy person." But really, there are two unique features about Americans that is not replicated anywhere else in the world. The first is Americans have no concept of risk at all.
Mm-hmm.
They only really see the upside. It's quite unique that an American will second mortgage their home to invest in their next door neighbor's startup. You were talking about having full in-depth conversations with strangers. That's just that complete absence of risk mindset
Mm-hmm.
permeating across a population of almost 400 million people. The second thing is the friendliness. I think the most polite people on the planet come from Texas. It's sort of absurd to see the manners of people. Like, I don't think there's anybody on the planet that has those sorts of manners. An elderly gentleman will call you sir. It's sort of crazy. But really, those manners extend into business relationships as well. So if you would introduce me to somebody in London who knew of me and respected me, good luck getting time in their diary next month. In the US, never heard of me, but because you made an introduction, they'll find time for a coffee today. And that's not a isolated example, that's very commonplace. And you imagine that pace of building connections extrapolated out. It's just a much better environment for making friends, building connection, doing business.
Yeah.
You've had this experience, you've lost your job. You don't look like someone who's defeated. I think because you live in an environment where experience is celebrated, you're going to have so many offers in your inbox saying, "I really respect what you did. I'd love to talk to you about an opportunity."
Yeah, it's certainly interesting hearing just your perspective from the outside, like sort of looking in and being drawn to that. That's really cool. Um, yeah, I think that you're right. There have been people reaching out and lending encouragement, and like that example, if you're introduced to somebody who is really busy, but if depending on who makes the introduction, you know, I've been talking to people and they say, let me get you connected with so and so, and they'll start a group chat, and man, there will be it'll be a really important person and somebody who does not have a lot of time. Their bandwidth is sort of eaten up, but they're making time because they want to help me. And I'm really thankful that we live in a country that there's still some vestiges of these manners and of lending a hand and being a good Samaritan. There's still tons of awful people that
But you
you
are the country of immigrants, right? Everybody had to lend each other a hand. You've survived because of it and thrived because of it.
yeah, and our country has origins in people who moved here were willing to take a big risk. right? And it was something, in a lot of ways, something brand new. Um, and yeah, it's really cool that those influences and that tradition still lives on today and it echoes. I know
So
people.
let's, sorry.
No, I know people complain a lot about how cultures are shifting and things are getting really bad. But just in my everyday life, the people that I engage with are really great people. What you see online, viral videos surfacing, politics. If that's all you're paying attention to, you might think this is a pretty terrible place. But my neighbors across the street, I can trust them, and you know, in a professional setting, like meeting people just in ordinary everyday life, man, there's still a lot of really great people.
So let's go. Let's stay with the people. Who do you admire? Who inspires you in your life? You were talking about wisdom earlier. Who do you draw wisdom from?
Yeah, I can think of a few people. One of them is my pastor at church. He's a very honorable man, and you can just tell that. Um, I look at his life, and he's raising 8 children, and him and his wife, they have a beautiful family, and it takes courage to really to do something like that, because you're giving of yourself continuously, and like whether you have one kid or you got 12, right? It's still really hard, but like just to see somebody who's so faithful in the small areas of life where people don't have a camera zoomed in on in your house, and but like you are living out faithfully and with courage and responsibility even when nobody's looking. And
So
I can.
what details have you observed in his behavior that you think when my time is there, I'd like to behave like that?
Yeah. Oh man, that's a really good question. It's good to think about that. Um, well, I see how he engages with his children, right? And like I've seen a lot of kids who at 4 or 5 years old, they're brats, right? Like they have no manners and very inconsiderate. And I look at his children and I'm like, man, these are some great kids, right? They're not perfect, but um, you know, I would like to raise a family that way. And I think it's spending a lot of time with them, reading a lot, reading good books, and man, spending quality time, and not really falling for the trap that, hey, I gotta work myself to death, spending so much time away from my family so that I can spend more time with my family. Right? Because you see people who do that, like they're like, man, I'm gonna work so hard, I'm gonna make so much money, I'm gonna get freedom so I can relax and have more time with my family. But you're giving up that exact same thing. Like there's a perhaps a right way to go about that, but like, you're only allotted so many years, or so much time, and each age is special. And um but I just see him as a person who he shows up on time. He reaches out, and he cares about the people who are in his community, and it's doing the right thing when nobody's looking exactly. So, having real integrity.
You talked about good books. So obviously you're being judgmental about books. What do you classify as a good book right now?
So some of the books um, I'm reading a couple books written by John Taylor Gatto. One of them is called Dumbing Us Down, and he writes as a former educator, having spent 30 years in the public school system, and he's critiquing the institution of public school. And I think there's a lot of valuable insights in that book.
Okay.
Um, Neil
Is
Postman,
he recommending anything in there?
yes, he's at this point he's pretty much saying like this institution needs to be done away with. And there's like the problem isn't that the public school system needs to be reformed. The problem is that it's doing exactly what it was designed to do.
Right.
And so there is no room to
Hence
reform.
dumbing, hence dumbing down.
Yes. And there's nobody who escapes from this institution unharmed.
Right.
Children get harmed, families get harmed, teachers get harmed,
Sure.
mainly because you have a network, right? A public school is really a network, but it's putting on this facade that it's a community. And when a network confuses itself for a community, you can actually do some real damage. And that's what schools do. They preach messages like, you'll always have a home here. And when we all know as soon as you graduate, or if God forbid someone passes away, it's like maybe a week will go by, but like you will eventually be forgotten. A real family doesn't forget you. But the schools and these government schools, they keep taking on these paternalistic responsibilities that they actually by design cannot take these. And so a network allows you to associate with a group of people for a very narrow purpose. And it can be really good when you stay within that range. But like if you went to a networking meeting and it was to grow your business or something like that, but all of a sudden you started bringing your problems like, oh, hey, like I'm really going through this hard time with my wife. Like the network is not designed to be able to meet that or to accommodate that issue. Communities are. You
Right.
can't be a part of 20 communities. You just can't. You can be a part of a family, a church, or a faith-based organization, or like in your neighborhood. Those are usually some of the big ones, and maybe like one more. But you can harm children, you can harm people when networks. And so that's what he talks about in this book. Um, Another author is Neil Postman. He wrote a book called Entertaining Ourselves to Death. Man, it was written in the 80s or 90s, but you would think that he wrote it last week.
Right.
And
Very
he
prescient.
he's since passed away, but that book I think really articulates just what has happened when we've let the medium which shapes our consciousness be one that is like image based, television based, social media based. It actually changes the way you think. The United States and most of the world, from like the time of the telegraph to where before TV was invented in like the 30s and 40s, everything was text based. You know, the way people spoke, it sounded like if you were to transcribe it, there wouldn't be very much difference with how people spoke versus what you read on a page. You know, and that really influences like your perception of reality. And you can see now that like he talks about how every arena of public discourse since television, and now it's even worse with social media, but it necessarily must increasingly be entertaining. You know, our presidents in the 1800s were fat, overweight, not really attractive looking people. And, since television, it's like, because it was their ideas that really got communicated. But now it's your image, how many one-liners you can have in a debate. And he talks about the Lincoln Douglas debates. Um, they were hours long. They were like all day things, and people would go and they had the mental stamina to listen to these really drawn out, like each person got 2 hours for a rebuttal. You know, they would go home and have dinner and come back for these debates. It was a huge part of your civic and social life.
Right.
But now we've sort of really lost that. And so I think he articulates that really well, and why we're seeing some of the problems we do today in society.
When you were talking earlier about um, what happened to cause you to lose your job, I was thinking about what the follow-up should be. And And that's, I think, what it should be. I think you should host a debate with your students, and you should play the school board and make all the reasonable assumptions in that debate to say, well, he should have stopped here and known the limits and whatever else you can come out with, so that they then take the passionate, well, he was trying to educate us. And I think that,
Mm.
beyond being an incredible piece of experience for them to have to debate you on something that you're very close to, that'd be incredible content.
Yeah, that would be. Yeah, there's an educational incentive there. Like, it would it would really help them think.
Also, if you do it the style that you're saying, and you make
Yeah.
it the Joe Rogan of debates, where it's so long that everybody's so fatigued that you really get to the meat of it.
Hmm. Yeah, that's a good idea. I'll have to, I got plenty of time on my hands now, so I can probably, draw something that up and all the kids are off on summer vacation. I could see if they'd be interested in that.
And debates are a phenomenal format, not just for the people participating, but also for the audience. The audience gets a lot of value out of a debate.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. I appreciate the suggestion.
But I mean, it just seems like a natural progression from what you've experienced, what the students have experienced, what we as people that have followed your story have experienced,
Hmm.
to keep that teachable moment going so that more and more people can enjoy this learning.
Yeah. No, that's really good. I think I might follow up on that.
For sure.
Hmm.
Okay, so we've got a book about burning down the public school system. We've got a book about burning down TV and social media. What's the third book?
Um, Lord of the Rings. I never read Lord of the Rings. I finished the first one, and I'm slowly making my way through the Two Towers.
Right.
But the Lord of the Rings is there's some people I know who they just whiz through the Lord of the Rings and they can read it so quickly. I love these. I'm getting more into some of these fantasy novels like slowly, but this one in particular, like, it just has such a slow development, and I kind of struggle with that. And uh,
Sure. It's
as of
hard
lately, I've
because
been kind of distracted.
we've been so conditioned to skim read through
Yeah.
stuff that when you read American classics, for example, so I've got one in my bag right now. A friend of mine in Boston was reading it, so I went and got it as well.
Oh, Grapes of Wrath. Okay.
And I've been skim reading for so long, like reading the equivalent of Harry Potter over and over again, that I have to reread paragraphs like
Hmm.
2, 3 times to really take in the description of that scene or that landscape or the emotion that person was feeling. Like he goes into such incredible depth of trying to get the reader to see things from his point of view. And you were talking about language. He writes it so authentically, like he's spelling the words the way they would pronounce them.
Yeah. Yeah. That's it can be hard to get used to that. But I think it's good to step back in time a little bit and to sort of really let the picture be painted. And it makes it so much more tangible, and you you can really get drawn into the story that way. I've only seen the movie Grapes of Wrath. I haven't actually read the book, but I
Okay.
remember the opening scene in the movie was, this farmer, he was a landowner. He was getting forced off his land by the government, and he talks about how he said, "No, my daddy and my granddaddy, his daddy had this land." And it just made me think, like, I don't know if anybody today had, like, besides maybe fifth or sixth generation farmers, can really resonate being attached to a plot of land that way, because you're you're walking the same steps that your great great grandfather walked, and just to experience that sort of continuity with the past, I'm jealous about that. Like, I think that's why people today are flocking to Orthodox churches because they want to have something that keeps them in contact with the past. And that's what I kind of took away from the opening scene of that movie.
There's a lot of call for nostalgia these days. It's not just faith. Look at the rise of Pokemon cards now. So people that collected as kids now have money and so much disposable income that that connection with something that they used to love is now easy to plow money into.
Yeah. Yeah. So what kind of books besides The Grapes of Wrath are you reading right now?
I'm actually writing a lot right now.
Okay.
So I'm trying to read the Walter Isaacson biography of Leonardo da Vinci, but I can't find it in any bookshop. I've been to like 10 bookshops, so I'm listening to it on Spotify. Um, but I want to go back and read all the Harry Potters now that there's a new TV series coming out, and obviously that won't take long, right? They're not difficult reads. I mean, she's a phenomenal author. Like, yes, those stories have a Star Warsy formulaic arc behind them, but the world she created is is otherworldly. Like, you know, there's some real connection that we can all form with those characters in that world.
Yeah, that's what's almost more impressive than just writing a book. It's you created an entire world that at this point, like I think I've heard her say things like, you know, she can't make a character do something because it's just not in the character of what he or she might do. It's like these characters have taken on a life of their own, and she kind of has to like it's almost like she discovered the world rather than created it.
Right.
And
Beginning of Rambo 3 when the army general comes to get Rambo out of that temple, and he goes, "We didn't create you. You were already there in the rock. We just chiseled away at it."
yeah, yeah, I love stuff like that. It's like it sort of makes like this human experience like we what else out there is there to discover like that, you know? Um,
But also, just going back to her, yes, she's created this incredible thing and achieved something quite phenomenal, fairly unique. But if you look at her social media now, you see how really it was only her that could have created this. Her strength of conviction and what is right is coming across so powerfully in her social media posts, like taking on the entirety of, I think, what you called the woke, uh, uh, I don't know what to even call it, community.
yeah. Like the forces that sort of nope, you can't like it's hard to define, but you know it when you see it sort of thing.
Sure. And I didn't for the longest time. I was like, oh, people are entitled to their opinion. And I have a friend of mine who sends me lots of posts about all the horrible things in our food. And I often went back to him and I said, how is this possible? How can they be putting this stuff in our food? And he goes, it's the woke mind virus. Like they have an actual virus. They don't see it. And it was only at that moment that I changed my lens from, well, respect that they've got their own point of view and try and listen and understand where they're coming from, to actually I think there's something really wrong. There's something pervasive here that is not quite right. It's not worth um, going down a questioning route personally to go, why do I feel so bad about what they're saying? To maybe saying, actually, what I think they're saying is very, very wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. The it's almost like I'm just gonna think out loud here for a second. But um I don't know. One thing that I see is people who are not willing to submit to truth. And I'm looking at for example, somebody who wants to identify as somebody of the opposite sex. Okay, let's just take transgenderism for one second. In order to do that, you have to suppress the authority of reality of your own body. Like your body is an authority over your being. And when you submit your mind and conform to reality, like you experience a peace and a an understanding of the world, right? Like we are not meant to like rule over truth. But I think it's kind of like how C.S. Lewis talks about it in The Abolition of Man. It's like we have sort of um, overcome nature, and so now we're trying to overcome ourselves. And you can't circumvent some of the basic realities. Like, so I don't know really. Maybe you get a gist of what I'm trying to say, but
I do, but like let's put it into the context of your job, right?
mhm,
So you work in a system that is largely run by people who, you know, have made their own truth a lot of the time, like they did
mhm,
in your situation, right?
yeah,
You can read the letters. Um, they're they're so far gone. They decided that they were going to fire you, and any reason is justifiable. But then you see on Twitter the parents railing against their school board, saying, "WTF? I do not want my kids being subjected to this sort of stuff." How do you, as someone who wants to lean into truth, react to things that you see as quite clearly untruthful?
I think at this point in time, like we that's where courage sort of steps up. We have to be courageous to speak out against things that are blatantly false, like plainly obviously false. We can't think that like,
Like
oh,
like cen- like censoring a book.
like censoring a book or seeing a boy at our school or seeing a girl at our school lose to a boy in a track and field race. Like it's time to call those things out bravely and with courage. And because well meaning people who disagree for far too long now have passively, quietly disagreed. And it's just allowed that to perpetuate more and more. And so now it feels like you're going against the wind even harder. Whereas, like, man, if we would have just done this earlier and stopped the nonsense, stopped the censorship, stopped the lies, now we sort of have an uphill battle rather than just like a more neutral one. And so I think we have to have courage to speak the truth, even when it makes us uncomfortable.
So you're a person of faith. So you believe in fate. You believe that everything is written. Maybe we shouldn't be dealing in hypotheticals, and maybe this is where we're supposed to be, so that we have this adversity to get the courage, like your students found, to protect you, to protect the truth.
Certainly, there's a balance that is sort of intangible, and as limited as human beings with a limited understanding of everything that is going on, you know, that's providentially ordained by God. It's hard. Like I know that we have to be faithful in the moment that we are called to. And so even though ideally, right, like we see so many problems around truth that are plaguing our society, right? Like maybe God did permitted it to get this bad in order so that a mighty work of God could be displayed. I'm reminded of like in John chapter 9, there's a man born blind, and his disciples asked him, "Who sinned because that made this man born blind? Was it the man who sinned, or was it his parents?" And Jesus responds, "Neither him nor his parents, but this happened so that a mighty work of God could be displayed. Like this man was born blind for the sole purpose for God's work to be displayed through this man's life. And I know it's not a one for one example with what's going on now, but it's like I
But
do
actually,
think,
it is. I think it's
yeah,
simple. We are human, and so therefore we have almost no knowledge, and everything is as God ordained, and therefore we are supposed to deal with whatever we have.
hmm yeah, and God can work through that, and it's you know He is the only one who is completely omniscient to know the motives of everybody's heart, what's going to happen after, why, what happened before all of this that led to this. Like, there's so many things happening at the big scale, and then he's also got things he's working in individual people's lives, and it just creates this big picture. But we just have to stand for truth and be faithful in the moments that we find ourselves. And this situation, like some of the good, the silver lining in all of it is like, man, I think some of my students have more courage now and
And that's going to be life-changing for them.
life changing. Who knows? Like one of the students actually, I don't know if you saw this on I posted a little snippet of it on my X account, but the student who actually challenged me, he went on a podcast and shared a little bit from his vantage point. And he's a terrific student. He has the gift of communication. And for being a 15-year-old, he is just going to forge his own path. Like I can see it already in this young man. And the world is his oyster. But man, he's going on a podcast and he's speaking boldly, standing for truth, and like I'm so encouraged by that. I'm so proud of him. And like he's just one student. And some of the other students who came to the school board meeting to make a public comment, there was two overflow rooms.
Wow.
There wasn't enough room in there for people to sit, like, but to get up there, have a speech prepared. You're speaking to people who are well into their 40s, 50s, and 60s, and you're 15 and you're defending something you believe to be true. Like that takes courage. And I believe that courage is the virtue upon which all other virtues rest. And if it's like if you ever played Jenga and you pull like courage is like that one on the bottom. Like if you pull that out, all the other good things are coming down. It doesn't
Sure.
matter if you are nice. It doesn't matter if you respect the truth. Do you have the courage when the stakes are high to tell the truth? And these students at 15, like they did, and like I'm blown away, and it's just really cool.
I really hope there's more than just a growth story here for you personally. I
Yeah.
hope there's a redemption story here. And it brings two stories to mind. I'm sure you've heard about the story about Sam Altman being pushed out of OpenAI, and then over the course of a week, there was a groundswell to bring him back. But my kids love WWE. I grew up watching WWE too with my dad. And so right now there's a storyline where John Cena, um, in many people's eyes, the greatest of all time, is now retiring. And he's turned heel for the first time. And he is elevated with his intelligence what it means to be a bad guy in the fiction of wrestling. He says to the crowd, this is an abusive relationship. This isn't healthy. I kill myself for your entertainment and you boo me. This is not what a healthy relationship looks like. It's amazing. And then there's another character. His name is Ron Killings, but he goes by R-Truth. That's his character name. And universally loved in the wrestling locker room. And he always has these little comical segments. And he makes these wrestlers break out of character. He's that funny. Like his delivery is so good. So he had an amazing match with John Cena and then immediately got fired. Every single wrestler took to Twitter. Not a single one abstained. They said, This is the saddest thing we've ever heard. The crowd in the next show bring back truth.
They were
I
chanting
mean,
"Bring truth."
bring back truth. The loudest chant.
Hmm.
The next John Cena match, he turns up with a hood, smashes John Cena. John Cena loses the match, and the crowd goes wild.
Wow,
So
that's cool.
obviously, in the background, they realized that all of this love for this character, they needed to capitalize on it. And so let's surprise everybody and bring him back. And
Yeah,
then
you love a redemption story
you
like that.
love a redemption story. So I
Mhm.
really hope that beyond the growth for you and your students and the people that are following your story, I hope there's a really nice redemption arc for you as well.
Yeah, well, thank you for the kind wishes, and it's an honor to be asked to share the story, and so thank you for asking me to come on and to have the conversation and appreciating nuance too. I think that's something that people are losing today is like the ability to appreciate nuance and taking the time to understand nuance.
Yeah, they're not losing it. And I have this conversation with so many people about so many things. We are short on role models.
Hmm.
Unless we see it, we don't know it. With the food that we're eating, with nuance. I had a friend earlier messaging me. Let me pull it out because it's actually quite prescient. She was saying, where is it? She said, "I love LOL, laugh out loud. Love that people still use mouthwash and don't use tongue scrapers. Like we're having the most basic of conversations, right?" And I wanted to defend the people that were doing this, saying, "Look, it's just a lack of knowledge." She goes, "But is it? Is it really excusable in this day and age? There's so much information out there. I'm sure they would know what the latest fad was or the latest fashion." And I'm like, look at the state of education, the state of the news, and the lack of role models. Most people live in a bubble. It's really difficult to get out of that bubble. Like,
Hmm.
who's pulling you out? And she goes, "I don't watch the news. I prefer facts."
Yeah, that's really good. It's cool how you guys took a simple thing and made it something, you drew out these broader principles. I think that's cool. But
Well,
yeah.
I want to have hope that we are all on a journey
Hmm.
and we all have a part to play in each other's lives. And the moment we abdicate that responsibility to help somebody else, then that circle breaks.
Yeah. And especially now with the internet coming to maturity, right? There's still a lot of like, I don't know, 15 years ago, you thought the internet had reached its apex in connecting the world, but like even today, like I think we're seeing it even mature even more, and people are connected, and I'm really optimistic. I know there's ways to use the internet irresponsibly and things like that, but man, doing stuff like this and building really good connections and storytelling and thinking through difficult things facing our society, and it has allowed truth narratives to perpetuate, and a lot of the things that we didn't know that were in our food, right? Like we know now because somebody had an outlet to be able to reach the masses, and people know truth, and so there's
But
a
not just reach, persuade.
persuade. Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good.
So I've been told plenty of times why you're eating gluten, your stomach looks the way it does because you're eating gluten, and I ignored it all, right? I like eating.
Hmm.
I took a ride home on the underground, the tube in London with a friend, and I can't remember what she said, but she really got through to me. And I quit gluten after that. And it changed the whole profile of how I feel. But it's always going to take somebody, and it's usually just one person, to just cut through the noise and really reach you.
Yeah, I think that's how most of life is. And it's hard to discover things completely on your own. And I think it's by design. We weren't meant to do life completely lone wolfing it. And so I'm thankful for interactions like this one. I truly am. So I'm really grateful. And I hope there's a redemption light at the end of the tunnel. It feels like a victory in a lot of ways already, and but I hope there's something sort of greater. Not that I want to prosper um, in a selfish way, but like you were saying about the redemption, the redeeming aspect of the story. Like I hope that there's something that can inspire people at the end of all this, where it's like, man, the book can now be closed because this episode is it started, we watched it, it ended, and it has a truly inspiring redemption factor to it, and that's sort of what I hope after
I don't
talking.
hope the book closes. I hope
Yeah.
that there's more people reading the next
Hmm.
part of it.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
And looking forward to this debate.
Yeah, I will definitely keep you posted. I'm gonna start planning it. I'm traveling this week. We're gonna go visit some family in Florida, actually. So it's funny you mentioned Florida earlier, but I'll be letting some of the ideas percolate, and how could we make it a cool production, but letting the message and the content be communicated in a way that gets to the heart of the message, I think, and it allows people who have been following to engage a little bit more.
Totally.
Yeah.
Well, Matthew, thanks so much for sharing your story and your thoughts. And looking forward to following the rest of your journey.
Yeah. Thank you, Ray. It's been a pleasure. And maybe we can do it again sometime. That'd be really cool.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Thank you.
Take care, man.